I can't think of a greater time that we need to have a close eye on sex offenders. And I want to thank the mayor again for that vision, because we know a significant number of these people are out of compliance. Generally about 50% of sex offenders that we go out and pay a visit to are out of compliance in some form or fashion in terms of not living where they're supposed to be living. On a weekly basis, we will be targeting the most, what we call the Sex Offender of the Week internally, looking for individuals that we believe to be the most violent, or the one that poses the highest risk to our public. And there will be a concerted effort to try to locate that individual at the direction of our two investigators. So I'm confident that with the new units focused on compliance checks and proactive searches, that we are going to make the citizens of Fresno much more safer as a result of these efforts. So, Mayor?
Any questions?
Chief, can you tell us a little bit about what the offense this guy did to have to register? Was it the rape?
The fact that he had committed a home invasion, burglary into a home in Merced. This individual broke into the house and committed a rape, and was subsequently arrested for that rape and convicted. And remember, that was after he had already served time in prison in Texas for a double murder. A very violent individual. And then he moved to Fresno when he got out of prison, was convicted for a burglary, 2 burglaries I believe, was sent back to prison, and then failed to contact his parole agent within 5 days and have GPS put on him. So he had a history of violence that included both murder and rape, and was roaming around in the Fresno community without being monitored.
When he was most recently released, how long was that window of time that he did not comply?
He was released, I believe, April 5th of 2009 from prison, and so he had been on the streets for that period of time. And we've not been able to locate him. We've put out parole alerts, or patrol alerts rather, but this is the first time we've been able to apprehend this individual.
Do we know approximately how many sex offenders are out there in Fresno right now?
We have about 1,700 sex offenders registered in the city of Fresno.
2 officers versus 1,700 aren't very good odds, are they?
Well, fortunately, we monitor these individuals with much more than these 2 detectives. And many of the individuals that are registered as sex offenders, they really don't necessarily pose that high risk to the community, even though they're registered. And we want to make sure that our focus, though, is on those individuals that we believe pose the greater risk. And that's what we're doing with this unit.
How long have some of these individuals been out of compliance? You said you were going after those with the longest first.
We have some of those individuals up to 90 days that have been out of compliance. And those are the individuals that Detective Bishop and Detective Yingbang are going after first.
What kind of charges do they face?
These individuals will face a parole violation. This individual was on parole. He's probably, anybody that's out of compliance will face somewhere around 16 months, I believe, in prison.
And you said that, was it the officer that went undercover to track him down?
Yeah, our officer went undercover at the Paparillo house, and I anticipate there'll be much more of that. That's why he's not on camera today, either one of them, because I anticipate that they're going to work in an undercover capacity, blending in certain locations, trying to arrest these individuals that are on the run.
Was it a tip that led y'all to Paparillo?
Some information that had been gathered through the investigation that led us to believe that this individual was frequenting that area.
Chief, is the funding for the 2 detectives, that's protected, it's not subject to any budget cuts? Or?
This was guaranteed funding for 2 years. It's pursuant to a grant. And then I would imagine after that 2-year period, we'll reassess, have a conversation with the mayor, and see where we go from there.
One question for the mayor: how important do you feel this sex offender push is for the overall safety of the community?
Well, I think it's extremely important, especially given the fact that we've got this gap between the state saying, on the one hand, we're turning things over to the locals, and then on the other hand saying, oh, wait a second, you don't really have the authority to monitor with GPS. So we're really trying to call that question. It's going to be something that I'm sure will be battled through courts unless there's legislation that's advanced. But in the meantime, we've got to make sure our streets are safe, and dedicating detectives to this effort, as the chief mentioned, it is the best approach. I think the use of technology is always a good supplement to human effort, and we could achieve perhaps more widespread monitoring with GPS, but we know for sure that our the guys on the street are very effective in tracking down those that pose the highest risk for our citizens.
What is the actual active action going on right now to try to resolve that gray area?
Well, last conversation we had on that was a few months ago with Senator George Runner, and he was looking at some amendments and some various legislative remedies. Right now, Sacramento is in such turmoil because of the budget. I have not heard that the legislation has really gotten any serious legs, but was with the senator last week on a different subject, and will certainly follow up with him.
Are there any court challenges to this right now?
Not at this point that I'm aware of. Do you know, Chief?
No, I'm not aware of any.
You mentioned
Introduced.
Megan's Law and tips from people in the community. I know that one of the questions we often get is why are some of these sex offenders allowed to live so close to schools, even though voters did go to the ballot and say that they didn't want them living that close to school. Where does that stand in the courts?
I think that is one of the areas that has not had a decision made. There was I believe, a case in San Diego, and there was a couple of court cases, and I haven't kept track with in terms of whether they had disposed of those cases. But one of the flaws, I guess, under Jessica's law, well, there's some vagueness in Jessica's law, and there's some also, I believe the restriction was living within 2,000 feet of a school or a park. And in some jurisdictions, like the city of San Francisco, that would virtually eliminate any sex offender from being able to live in their city. And so with that, you end up pushing those individuals out into the rural areas, which is not necessarily a good thing for people who live in the rural areas. So there are some areas in Jessica's law that need to be refined and tweaked, and that's what the mayor was speaking of, that Senator Runner was trying to do some things to make that law more user-friendly in terms of law enforcement. And I believe he introduced the legislative changes in February of last year, and we're hopeful, or this past year, and we're hopeful that that will make its way through, but it's going to be a period of time.
Chief, it seemed like from the first plan, one of the positives was keeping the sex offenders outside the city limits with the tracking. Do you feel like this operation does that?
I believe what we have put in place is something that is going to allow us to have the confidence to know that we are aware of the locations of sex offenders, that we're keeping a close eye on them. There's nothing that's going to allow us to keep a 24-hour-a-day eye on them, not even GPS, because they have the ability to cut the GPS off and do a number of things to defeat that. And as the mayor said, I believe putting forth the human effort, the detectives that are out there on the street monitoring these individuals, is the best step. And it needs to be, at some point in time, supplemented or augmented through the use of technology such as GPS. But what we have in place today is something that's very good and perhaps long overdue.
One more question?
Do any neighboring towns have a similar program like this? Are you working with any other neighboring police agencies?
On a countywide basis, our investigators do work in a collaborative way with the Sheriff's Department. And I know from time to time there are some joint efforts out in the county where there are some large-scale 290 verifications and compliance checks. But yes, we do communicate frequently with our allied law enforcement agencies, because we know that individuals that are out of compliance in Fresno oftentimes move to smaller cities, hoping to keep their anonymity. And it's important that our investigators are going to go wherever these individuals are. Boundaries will not limit where our investigators go to seek out these people that are out of compliance.